Good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this ISTE online event. I'm delighted to have with me today Steve Denning and Chris Rourke from Uservision. My name is Debbie Archer from ISQI, and I'm the Managing Director for ISQI Limited. Hopefully you all know a little bit about ISQI, so I won't go into too much detail. We are a global certifications body with an extensive portfolio. Just a little bit about today's session. We're talking about usability testing. I wanted to give you some context in the first instance, because I know a lot of you come from the IS2QB community. We're not specifically talking about the IS2QB usability testing product. Uservision are an accredited training provider for UXQB, with the Usability and User Experience Qualifications Board, and they offer training in this. So we're looking at it as a slightly different perspective, perhaps, to IS2QB. I've hosted presentations before with Chris, and it's always really interesting, content rich, and I'm really excited to hear a little bit about usability testing and helping our customers to have products which they can be delighted with. I'm going to hand over to Chris to introduce himself, and then over to Steve to introduce himself. So Chris, over to you now.
Okay, hello. My name's Chris Rourke. I'm the founder and CEO of Uservision. We're a user experience consultancy based primarily here in Edinburgh, where I'm talking to you from. And but we also do a lot of work elsewhere throughout the UK and Europe, and actually quite a lot in the Middle East as well. And I've really enjoyed the variety of things that we do in the world of usability and user experience as the whole sector has evolved, as technology has evolved. And what we're going to be talking about today with usability testing is one of the key tools in our toolbox as user experience consultants. And to Steve.
Yeah, my name's Steve Denning. I'm Director of User Experience at Uservision. So I've been in the technology field for around 20 years, and the last kind of 15 focusing on this area of usability and understanding what makes human beings tick and how we can design products and services to work with them rather than against them. So within Uservision, I head up the team of consultants, and we work with clients around the world and across multiple sectors to help them understand who their users are, what their users need from their products and services, and how to shape incredible experiences that engage them and work for them.
That's smashing, Steve and Chris. Thank you so much for that. Just a little note to anybody who's tuning in. Please do ask any questions, comments, and we'll answer them at the end of the session. Chris is going to run through a presentation so he can share some information about usability testing. Don't be shy. Pop your questions into the comments box, and I know that Steve and Chris will be delighted to answer those. So Chris, if you're just about ready, I'm going to start to share the presentation and look forward to hearing a little bit more.
It looks as though we've potentially lost Chris's connection. So I will kick us off while we're waiting, and Chris will hopefully rejoin in a second. So yeah, Chris has introduced us. As he said, Uservision's been around for about 20 years, and everything that we do is kind of based on the belief that the best experiences are grounded in a deep understanding of human behavior. That if we're going to create products and services that are going to really engage users, they're going to be useful and usable, we really need to have that deep understanding of the behavior, the human behavior that underpins that. Because at the end of the day, we're designing for human beings. So everything that we do in Uservision is centered around understanding that human behavior and then designing for it. And usability testing is really a big part of this. Usability testing has been around really for decades. Usability, oh, Chris is back. I'll hand over to him in a second. I'll finish my flow of thought and then hand back. So usability has been around for a long time. It kind of came out of originally the kind of the Industrial Revolution, when all of this new what was seen as new technology at the time was being introduced into workplaces. Obviously, it was machinery back then in factories. And there was a realization that if people were actually going to be able to maximize the benefit of this new technology, then they needed to understand how it works, and it needed to be designed in a way that would work well for them. And this kind of turned into the field of ergonomics. And then in the 70s, when IT started coming into the workplace, it was the same principle that if people were going to maximize the use of this technology, then it had to work for them. And this is where a field of software ergonomics came out. And software ergonomics turned into usability. How do we make sure that things are easy to use for people? And as technology has advanced, this has turned into this area of user experience. It's an acceptance that products and services now are more than simply a collection of functions. They're an integrated set of experiences. And as such, we need to design for those experiences. And usability testing is a really fundamental technique to help us to understand how well something works for users or not. So I will hand back to Chris at that point.
Okay, so on when we explain what usability testing is all about, the way I see it in its simplest sense is similar to the kind of sign I used to see when I grew up in the United States. And I used to see a sign that was like this near my house where I grew up. And even as a kid, I really understood it and I really liked it. And it says, if you hit this sign, you're going to hit this bridge. And it's, wonderfully simple. And in a sense, that's what usability testing is all about. It's giving you a chance to actually try out with very little downside, the equivalent of hitting that sign, to find out if when you release that product, whether it's website, app, or physical product, whatever it might be, if there's likely to be problems with people using it. And it's very much a needed thing, because a lot of times the people that are creating the website or system that you're creating are just so familiar with it, they can actually use that in their sleep. In fact, they're probably imagining it. And for a lot of the times, the people that are using it for the first time won't quite get it. They won't understand the proposition, or they won't know how to interact with it. So in its simplest sense, it's serving the same purpose as that sign. And there's still a lot of times where people need to be convinced of the value of it. Sometimes we're having to talk to a technical audience, and they're saying, well, it works perfectly fine. It's very robust. It passes the data end to end, etc. And then you can be tempted to ask the question, well, that's great. I'm glad that it's technically working so well, but if the user doesn't quite get it, it doesn't really work. And you can have an interesting discussion based on that. So in its simplest sense, that's what usability testing is all about. If you move on to the next slide, it has evolved with time, though. We have done usability testing for a long time, since the beginning of user vision. And traditionally, it would always be a face-to-face affair in the early days. You'd be in the same room with someone having a nice chat about what they would want to be doing online, what they would use this website or this kind of website for, and then watching them perform a few tasks. Sometimes you wouldn't actually have the website or software there. You might have an early version of the prototype, and that's what you can see on that left-hand screen is picture is sometimes you can do the usability testing with having the earliest version of the system, just as in some sketches that you've drawn up, and it's a lot of shuffling paper back and forth. So that's the traditional way to be doing it. And if you have the luxury of watching people in a studio with a one-way mirror or a monitor, that's great. You can have observers there, and that can be a really exciting time behind the glass, as it were. They can see the testing, but the participants in the testing can't see the observers. It's kind of an interesting experience, but and that's the real benefit to it. That's the traditional way. We're living in some slightly different times, and things have changed on a bit from then.
Although we hope to get back to this at some point soon.
Yes. We can always be able to do this, but things are often nowadays we're having to keep socially distanced and remote in all senses. So this is a kind of setup we're typically using now for usability testing. And since Steve, you're doing a lot more of these than I am these days, perhaps you can explain what happens on this kind of remote testing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fundamentals are exactly the same. And I think the examples that Chris just shared of testing with paper prototypes, testing in a face-to-face situation, are really important techniques, and then they're not going to disappear. At its heart, the fundamentals of either face-to-face testing, paper testing, or remote testing are all the same. You are testing with target users, so these are people recruited to most accurately represent your target audience. You are giving them realistic tasks and asking them to complete it using the system. You're observing them as they're doing it. They are thinking aloud as they're going through, so verbalizing what they're thinking. As a moderator, we are probing and really understanding what's behind their thought processes and their decision making, what they're liking and disliking, what's clear and what's unclear. And this is really the same when I'm doing it remote. The only difference with remote is obviously it's been facilitated through an online tool. So in this case here, it's an app that somebody downloads onto their mobile, or it's a plugin that they install in Chrome, and it allows us to communicate with them, allows us to see what they're doing on their screen. Also importantly, allows observers, so this could be stakeholders, clients, whoever's involved in the wider project, to observe the sessions live and learn directly from the users. There's nothing more powerful than seeing a real user struggling to use your design to really bring home where there may be barriers to use that need to be improved.
Okay. So there's quite a variety of different ways to do usability testing, and we've listed those on the left-hand side. I'd be quite interested if anyone has had experience in doing some of these various types of ways of doing it. I've showed before the paper-based ways of doing it with paper prototypes and just moving things back and forward when the person interacts with a piece of paper representing the screen. You can do usability testing on things non-visual. Just thinking of our world with smart speakers, you can do usability testing on that, and that's a very interesting experience looking at those kinds of menus. You can also do from the earliest beta versions of a website or a system. It's often called Guerrilla Testing, spelt in that way, where it's meaning just trying to do very informal testing, often in very informal, even public places, sometimes in coffee shops. Buying a cup of coffee for someone will often buy you maybe 10 minutes of their time, and you can do some good informal testing. It's not certainly a lab situation, but there's some good informal learnings that can be gained in that way. Doing it on the desktop and mobile, it's sometimes some technical challenges in trying to do the usability testing and sharing your screen on a mobile, doing that remotely, but those can be overcome. And doing it remotely, as we said, is the de rigueur these days. And also eye tracking is one that tends to catch a lot of attention. I consider eye tracking as a form of usability testing. We typically have to follow a slightly different protocol or way of running the usability testing there. As opposed to normal usability testing, when you're in the same room or even remotely, you typically would be encouraging the person to be what we call thinking out loud, explaining what they're trying to do, what their strategies are, sometimes why they're actually clicking on something and what they're expecting on the next page, that type of conversation, the stream of consciousness. With eye tracking, we typically don't go through that so much. We just let them carry on with the task. The value from that, obviously, is you get to see where people are looking, they're concentrating on performing the task, and you can get various outputs from that. You get heat maps, such as that one that's shown in the top left. You can get gaze trails and other ways of visualizing where people are looking when they're using the site, and that can be informative in some cases as well, if it's a very visual presentation that's the matter at hand. So there's quite a variety of usability testing that can be performed out there.
And it's worth talking about when it's good to test. If you consider typical product development time, you go from that initial ideation phase right through to the launch. And as time goes by throughout that process, the ability for us to make changes to the product slowly diminish, and the cost to make the changes increases. So changes made just before launch, which is often a very common place to conduct testing, are going to be very expensive and very difficult to do. You're very often going into rounds of change request issues. Now, we often say to our clients, your product will go through usability testing, whether you like it or not. The question is, do you want to be there when it happens? Do you want to be in control of that process, or do you want the usability testing to happen once it's out there in the wild and people are engaging with it, and you're getting the feedback via social media, or even worse, by people just turning off, unsubscribing, or not converting, or going to a competitor. So although testing often happens just prior to launch, the best time to start testing, as Chris has mentioned, is right at the start. Sketches on the back of a piece of paper can be put in front of an audience and get some valuable feedback. But more importantly, continuing that process of testing regularly throughout the process means that you iterate on your findings, so that by the time you get to the launch, you're not getting any nasty surprises. You're really, by that point, just kind of mopping up some of the more nuanced aspects to the design, but you've dealt with any fundamental issues prior to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Chris.
Yeah, and really, we just want to start hearing some of your questions about usability testing. Before we do, I just wanted to mention about a course that we do have coming up in a couple of weeks, from the 2nd to the 4th of February, and it is advanced training on usability testing. It's part of the Certified Professional for Usability and User Experience suite of training, and it's a 3-day course. It's actually 2.5 days of training, followed by a half-day certification exam. And it covers everything you'd want to know about usability testing, from how to do the planning for usability test, and doing the recruitment, which is a very important aspect of getting the right people to participate in the testing. The whole area of moderating and saying the right things, and actually knowing when not to say things, and the right way to ask questions and provide task scenarios. And then what to do with all the results, the analysis of that, the whole world of remote testing, and the very slightly tricky world of ethics and data protection and all of that. That can be quite a sensitive area to manage in usability testing. Other forms like A/B testing and heuristic evaluations, these are other forms of evaluation that are related to usability testing, are covered as well. So that's a course that we're running on the 2nd to 4th, and with the exam provided by ISKI in doing that. So any questions, please let us know. There's a link there for that, and some other other training courses as well. And I think we're just about there for question time.
Hi, Chris. Hi, Steve. Thank you so much for that. We do have some questions. Thank you. I know you've got so much more you could say, but we wanted to give an opportunity for questions so we could explore a few things which were very relevant to people listening. So first, I'll start with a question from Ragava. And he's asking about the difference between usability tools and accessibility tools.
Okay. Right. Steve, do you want to handle that?
Yeah, absolutely. So really, we would consider usability and accessibility to be kind of two sides of the same coin. Usability is around, is the product effective? Is it efficient? Is it satisfying? Accessibility is concerned with ensuring that the product can be used by anybody, irrespective of any physical or cognitive impairments they may have. So often, if people have particular impairments, so that could be visual impairments, it could be hearing impairments, it could be motor impairments, they maybe can't use a mouse or a keyboard, then there's various assistive technologies that are available to allow them to engage with technology and engage with the web. So as an example, if somebody has a visual impairment and they can't read what's on the screen, then they will use a screen reader, which will read out what's on the screen. So accessibility testing is there to ensure that the website, the app, works with these technologies, and therefore will allow people who rely on those technologies to access the web to have a positive experience. I would just add to that it kind of goes a step beyond can an assistive technology technically access the website. It may be that a screen reader, for example, can read a screen. That doesn't necessarily mean that that is a usable experience for the person who relies on the screen reader. So therefore, whenever we're approaching looking at the accessibility, we do it in two stages. We do an audit to look at, does it technically work with those assistive technologies? But also, we will run testing with people with various disabilities to make sure that it is a usable experience. So a very quick and simple example of this is back in the early days of Amazon, they went through a process of making sure that their homepage was accessible. And if you remember, this was back in the day when they had pretty much their whole product catalog was on the homepage. And technically, it was accessible. It was it could be read accurately by a screen reader. However, it took a screen reader, which speaks at a far faster rate than we do, took the screen reader about an hour to process the whole of the homepage. So although it was accessible, it wasn't usable by people who relied on that technology. So it's really important to incorporate both aspects into that. So usability and accessibility, both very important. They work together.
Mm-hmm. Some interesting questions I see in the comments there. I think the key takeaway for that is when it comes to accessibility, there's doing an audit and evaluating the site. Now that in itself is not what I'd consider usability testing. That's auditing the site and seeing how well it's following the accessibility de facto standards out there. But usability testing, I think it's worth pointing out, by definition, it needs to involve users that are part of this process. And we certainly can, and we do usability testing with people with disabilities. And they'll bring along very often their own assistive technologies or their own preferred screen reader or whatever browser they might be using. So, what question should we take next, Debbie?
Usability testing.
Sorry, which question?
It's on the screen, Chris. Does exploration testing fall into usability testing?
I'm not sure what we mean by exploration testing, but I'm going to take a guess. Is exploration testing something where you're asking a person to explore the site and try and find something? Now,
exploratory testing, yes.
Yeah, I'll just, what I think you mean is, yes, I think there's a couple different types of usability testing. Certainly you can do usability testing of an existing system. I often call this diagnostic usability testing. That's kind of, I think, my own term. But let's say you want to update your website. It's a really good idea to do some usability tests on the current one before you redesign it to find out what's working and what's not working on the current one. And then, so that might be a diagnostic, and maybe that's what you mean by exploration testing. But in typical usability testing, there's lots of different types of tasks, and some of those are information finding. And I call this finding a nugget of information. Can you find out the the highest rate interest of a savings account that this bank offers? Now that's one specific bit of information that they might have to explore to find that. Others might be a bit more transactional. Try and book a flight from London to Dubai for less than this price on these dates. Now that's more of a transaction. So I'm not sure what we mean by exploration testing, but it can be very exploratory, where you let the person go do what they want. And that can be really interesting, where you've got some information, maybe some from the recruitment of them, some background information, or the pre-test chat that what you have with them. And you say, okay, well, you'd like to go on holiday. Where would you like to go on holiday? Great. go try and do that. And if they can bring their own task and actually make it something that's meaningful to them, that can be very, very valuable. The only downside is, of course, everyone might have different tasks and you can't really cross-compare them very well. But because they're all quite more meaningful to each individual, people often put a little bit more effort into it, and you get a slightly different, interesting findings from those.
Another possible exploration testing meaning could be around understanding kind of comparing different design concepts and exploring what how a product might be designed. I think, although strictly speaking, it's not usability testing. That type of testing will happen in a very similar way, in that you could have a moderated discussion with the target audience to look through maybe several design concepts to understand which aspects work and which don't. So yeah, very closely related.
Thank you. Move on to a question from Alice. Let me just pop that on screen and then I'll read it for you. So how accurate do you find paper testing to be when it's translated to a screen? For example, find I approach physical paper and on-screen info completely different. I find that physical paper and on-screen info is completely different. Yeah. So yeah.
I'll start with this, and then I'm sure Chris will feed in. So there's this fantastic ability that we have as human beings, and it's known as suspension of disbelief. And if we are told to imagine that something is something else, our brain is very good at suspending our disbelief of that situation and actually entering into that idea that what we're looking at is something different. And what we find with paper prototyping is that suspension of disbelief really comes to the fore. If you say to people, this is not paper, this is a website or this is an app, then amazingly people just click into that. There's a number of things that you can do with the paper to try to increase the realism of it. And I kind of refer to it as Blue Peter testing. And apologies for anyone outside of the UK. Blue Peter is a kids program, very big into arts and craft. So it's very much about folding paper. You can create a frame to represent the phone, and then you can have another piece of paper that you pull through it to represent scrolling through the screen. But actually, if you tell people this is an app, you will find them tapping, you'll find them swiping, and you will get very valuable feedback. But it'll be feedback that will be appropriate for that stage of the testing. Now, of course, the next stage is that will be turned into some form of digital artifact, and it would undergo testing again, but it provides very valuable early feedback.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's a benefit that can happen when you're doing paper prototype, this early testing, is that it's very obvious to everyone that this is a very early stage of the product. And therefore, I think it encourages people to be a little bit more commenting on it and giving criticism, and because they can see that there's lots of room for improvement. Sometimes if things look really polished and it looks like the final version of the site, I know that it can discourage people from actually critiquing it. They'll say, well, it looks beautiful. You're actually not really worried about the visual look of things. What you're typically considering is what we call the information architecture, for instance, the navigation buttons, and how well the labels and the links are labeled. And that's the kind of thing that you can find out at that stage. And it's really valuable because you want to find that out early. Those kinds of things are really hard to try and fix later on. That can be. So you want to find out at that early paper stage.
That's good. I think we have a question here from Pretty, and I think it's kind of associated. Is usability testing just manual? It's manual in that I'm not sure exactly what we mean here. I think what we mean is it is something that you do need to have a participant and a moderator, and you are going through that with them. Now, I'm not sure if you're referring to maybe the technical methods. I see another question I saw about A/B testing and multivariate testing. That is a type of testing
about the website, and it can give you insights on sort of the likelihood that people will behave in a certain way en masse. But I don't consider A/B testing is a type of usability testing. Because the person, and we've all been involved in A/B testing, whether we like it or not. If you've been to Amazon's site, for instance, there's a good chance that whatever you were looking at, you could well be on one half or the other of an A/B test where you've got two different versions of a page and you're just happen to be exposed to one of them. With usability testing, the participant knows that they are taking part in this and they might be asked to be talking out loud and doing certain tasks. So I think if that's what you're meaning, I think there's a distinction to be made between usability testing and A/B and multivariate testing, although those can be valuable as well.
There's definitely a value in A/B and multivariate testing. It as Chris is saying, it's tackling a different problem. And I think the key difference is that A/B and multivariate are quantitative methods. So they are giving you numbers about which version did people click the most on, or which had the higher conversion rate. Usability testing is primarily a qualitative technique. So it's about getting that rich insight as to what are people thinking, what are they doing. So A/B testing may tell you that design B works better. It won't tell you why. And it also won't tell you if there's something in design B that could still be improved, and actually design C could be the right answer. Going back to the manual one very quickly, there's basically generally three categories of usability testing. You've got moderated usability testing, which we've discussed. You also have unmoderated and self-moderated testing, which may be what the question was referring to. So the moderated is manual. It involves the moderator there discussing with the user. Self-moderated and unmoderated are usually handled online, where people go through a process on their own and they will talk through it, or they could just be answering questions and the system monitoring where they're going. Again, those can be valuable. They don't get the same depth of insight as you get through moderated testing.
Perfect. Got quite a few questions, so I'm going to just run on through them. From Sega, how does UX UI design is it different from usability testing?
Well, I'd say that I think they're very much related, but if one is perhaps the creative one, the UX and UI design, there's a lot of legacy of best practice about design and what works and what doesn't work, and there's design styles. That's UX and UI design. Should be based on discovering the user needs and lots of good best practices for good design. Usability testing is really testing to see, does that actually work for the end users? So it's your way to find out if that design is actually working. Do people get the proposition? Can they actually find that information? So I see usability testing is a critical part of UI design, and typically these things iterate. So you do some design, you test it, you find out some things that work and don't work. Make a note of the things that work, because you don't want to probably change those too much, but go back and focus in on those things that don't. And going back and forth between those two is the nature of iterative design, which is really advocated by everyone for good UI UX design. Anything I think that's the main thing.
Just related to that, what's the best time to run a usability test in a project?
So I think going back to the graph that we showed, early and often. So literally a sketch on the back of a napkin can be tested. And the more you learn earlier on, the earlier sight that you will have of rework, the earlier you will find out if something's going to fail, and therefore the quicker you can get to the right answer. So day one, if possible, just keep doing it. Don't stop on day one.
Question from Petter, thank you very much. Who is doing usability testing? Only potential users, or also software testers from the development team producing the product?
Okay.
So I can take this one. The really important thing with usability testing is that it is done with target users. So the value of the usability testing will live and die by the quality of the recruit. So and I will contradict myself in a second, but I'll explain why. So therefore, finding people who are as closely as possible matched to the people who are going to be using your product or service at the end of the day is crucially important, because people approach different products and services with different experiences, different mental models, and therefore one person may approach in a very different way to another. It's therefore really important to get the type of people that you're aiming it at. I will caveat that with, as human beings, in some ways, we operate in a very similar way at a subconscious level. Therefore, if you put something in front of, as you said here, software testers from a development team, then sure, you're going to get something out of it. It's not going to necessarily be a complete waste of time. However, it's not going to give you the whole picture, and that's the really important bit. So test with target audience.
And related to that, Steve, a question, and let me just get this into the onto screen here. How do you recruit people to take part in the testing?
Sometimes with great difficulty. It depends on who you're trying to recruit. It's common to say, yes, you need to do the testing with the person on the street. Well, that might be the case. It depends on what you're testing. If it is a shopping app, then maybe that's the case. We find ourselves very often having to get very specific users. Could be what they call high net worth users of people that are investing in a bank account or something like that, or sometimes people with a specific medical condition. I know we've had to do that for the NHS, for instance. We've had all sorts, and it will be quite an effort to do that. Sometimes you have to screen them, so you often engage with a third party recruitment specialist, where they have great databases and they have great systems for actually finding whoever it is. And we have to go through creating a screener to actually make sure that we're weeding people in and out, that, for instance, the people are not rejectors of the brand. For instance, if you're doing some work for a certain hotel brand, let's say, and you give them a list, or any of these hotels that you would never consider staying in, and they say, well, I wouldn't stay in that one. That's just one of many things that you might ask someone to determine whether or not they would be qualify or not. So it you can do that if you have your own user group within your company. That's a great place to start. The one caveat to think about there is they might be already very familiar with certainly with your proposition and maybe your current website, etc. So they might have a bit of a head start on that. So there's always some value in getting people that are still in your target market but are not exact current customers already as well.
Thank you. And I think we've got a couple more minutes. Just got a couple more questions here coming in. What about testing, and carrying on again the theme, what about testing people in different countries and different languages? What are the best ways to do that?
So we will usually, if testing is happening in a language that we don't have as a fluency within the team, we'll often partner with our equivalents in other countries. It's really valuable where at all possible to test in the native language. A lot about usability testing is quite subtle. It's about identifying subtle body language, non-verbal communication, the things that, it's as much about the things that people aren't saying as the things that they are saying. And those can be highly cultural. And it's therefore very valuable to have a moderator from that same culture running the testing. So, you can get value out of running it in English. I've run testing across the world in English, and some countries, gosh, they speak better English than we do in the UK, but we will always, wherever possible, have a local language moderator, and then we'll use a local interpreter who can in real time translate into English so that we can hear what's going on. And actually running remote sessions makes this process quite easy. It's a lot easier to engage with people around the world using these remote technologies. It certainly saves on the air miles.
Yeah, that's one advantage from this new way of remote working, definitely. Question from one of the groups, I think the Facebook group, is what about conducting user research? I'm sorry, I can't say who actually asked that question.
Sure.
What about conducting? Okay.
Yeah, so again, very closely aligned, and there's a school of thought that would say that usability testing is a form of user research. User research is a banner term that's used for any situation where you are researching with your end users. Very often user research can be more at the discovery side of things. So before you're actually building things, you maybe want to understand who your users are and what they need. So you might be using interviews, focus groups, maybe ethnographic techniques like observation or diary studies. So those can be very valuable for understanding needs and motivations and desires and requirements. And then usability testing is far more about, let's make sure that this concept, this product, this service works and is easy to use for people. So again, hand in hand, but there's a subtle difference there.
Thank you. Thank you to Maria in Germany who put that question into the group. I'm sorry I couldn't see your name initially, so sorry about that. And I think this is possibly our last question. We have to get you chaps back again because we seem to have quite a few still in here. So GDPR, one of my favourite subjects at the moment, and data handling impact, how you're in usability testing. Just a little comment on the question in the box there.
Yes, it is important. GDPR, what it means in the running of usability tests is that when you're handling people's data, and that could be brought in, as I mentioned before, the recruitment coming in from a third party that has performed the recruitment, that when they're transferring it, it's done it's encrypted, that we may not actually know their last name. We only know the minimal amount of information. And certainly the client typically won't know their full contact details as well. Other things that have to be done, and this has always been part of, I think, within that same area, even prior to GDPR, but making sure that they have at least an informed consent or a non-disclosure agreement, so that the person knows that what they're doing with the usability test, that yes, we have some data about you. We could be actually making a video, and that's something we haven't mentioned up till now, is that typically you'll be making a recording of the session. And that's useful so that you can look back on it and maybe play back a really interesting part over and make sure you understand it. But that it's not going to be misused. You aren't going to end up being, up on YouTube or something like this. So that's, I'd say, similar to the GDPR, in that we're going to be looking after your data, and that we're doing this, we're capturing your information purely for the sake of performing this test. It's not going to be misused for any other things. We're not passing it on to the marketing people to try and see if they can sell you a product or something like that. And then I think a final key point is that we minimize the amount of time that we're holding on to their information, including their video. So as soon as the project is done, we hold on to it for as little amount of time afterwards, and then we delete the data. Steve, I guess you're a bit closer to that. Anything more specific to say about that handling of data?
The only other thing I'd say is that actually during the tasks as well, we try to minimize the amount of personal data that somebody's having to share as part of a task. So, for example, if we were doing a task on online banking, then we would provide them with a dummy account they could use so that they're not having to log in with their real details and have us viewing their financial information. Or if they were doing an application form, we wouldn't be asking them to put in their real phone number, their real address, because obviously that's been videoed. And even though, as Chris said, the data is destroyed as quickly as possible after we've got the insight, as moderators, our primary responsibility is the safety and comfort of the participant above all things. So that comes to that includes how we handle their data as well. So it's hugely important.
Fabulous. Well, gentlemen, we've come to the end. We're 45 minutes. I've popped onto the screen there the UserVision website. So if anybody does want to make contact with you, and of course I know you guys are both on LinkedIn, and people of the ISKI website, www.isqi.org, you probably know. I just want to say a huge thank you to both Steve and Chris for being here, and also a very big thank you to all of the people who've actually joined the session today and put questions to us. It's been really appreciated. So that's a goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
And from me, thanks very much.
Take care all. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.